I wanted to begin by dealing with a little bit of your history, just for all those people out there who might not know who you are. There are still a couple of them.
Oh, yeah.
And so I was sort of fascinated by the note on your album that your big brother Billy was the one who dragged you into the blues.
Yeah.
And this was back in, were you in Providence, Rhode Island?
Westerly, Rhode Island.
Okay, I have no idea. How close is that to Providence?
Everything's close in Rhode Island, but that's where Duke Robillard, he and I grew up together and traded, you know, we used to trade records after school. And
tell me about your brother getting you interested in this.
Well, he, you know, he was 3.5 years older than me, and he, this is, you know, in the 50s, late 50s. He was a hipster with dug all the R&B records and blues records, and you know, brought all that stuff home, and all of his friends were, that was their thing. So I listened to Sam Cooke and Little Richard and Jimmy Reed and Fats Domino and Muddy Waters and Little Walter, and, you know, when I was a kid, because he was into it at an early teenage age, and this was probably when I was, you know, 10 years old. You know,
so that's when you started playing what? The guitar?
I didn't start till I was about 12, and he and I took one of my grandfather's old wooden cigar boxes, and we made a guitar out of a cigar box. Took a couple of tries, but we finally got something that we could. You know, every time we got the thing made, you'd try to tighten up we had some old violin pegs, and we'd try to tighten it up, and it would always break something, but we finally figured it out, and we got it where you could kind of plunk around on it a little bit. So that was my first guitar. Yeah.
I would assume that these bands that you and Duke Robillard played in were not blues bands, though. They were.
Yeah.
They were?
Rock and roll, blues, of the rock bands that were happening. You know, I dug the Stones, and you know, I saw where they were getting their stuff the same place. I knew exactly. I looked at the album, their first 2 albums, they were all covers of all the stuff. I said, oh yeah, that's off of Best of Muddy, that's off of, you know, blah, blah, blah.
So you already knew this stuff.
Yeah.
And, what drew you to Ann Arbor?
Okay, well, let me tell you. We formed a band. There was an early incarnation of Roomful of Blues in the 60s. And then Duke and I, and Steve Nardella, who's a really good harp player from Cranston, Rhode Island, and Franny Christina, you know Franny,
yeah,
and Larry Peduzzi, who was the original bass player with Roomful. We formed a band called Black Cat in Providence in late 69, early 70. And we played all these joints around Providence and East Providence, and that was, and it was an amazing band. And we heard about this thing going on in Ann Arbor. We drove out there. We had played a gig at Bovie's Town Tavern in East Providence, and we only had one vehicle, and so we couldn't all fit in this vehicle. So our buddy who had the car, we told him, he said, let me go to work on this. So he met some chick in the club who had come out there, who had gone out, told her boyfriend she was going out to get orange juice, and stopped by the club for a drink, and he talked her into driving us to Michigan. So she came back a week later, and we weren't going anywhere real fast, so he said, we need to strike out for new, greener pastures. And yeah, to answer your question in a long, roundabout way, that the scene out there was unbelievable, because there was a pipeline between Chicago and Detroit. And so, and there were clubs. There was Mr. Flood's, and then the Blind Pig opened up. There was Flicks, then the Ark Coffee House. All of those places booked quality acts, and we wound up.
And you had a student town, so you had this.
Oh, totally, but it was a student town that really was hip to the blues. I mean, everybody played there, and we wound up being the house band at the Blind Pig, the Boogie Brothers, and that was me and Steve. And then a few months later, we got Franny. Franny came out.
What happened after that?
The Boogie Brothers lasted a couple of years. We opened a show at the Hill Auditorium for Commander Cody, and he really dug us. And he said, you guys got to come out to California. So I said, why not? So Franny and Julie had an old Volkswagen bus. Starter didn't work, but they're real easy to push start. So we push started that thing all the way across the country. Stopped in Mississippi and spent a couple of days with Fred McDowell, and then headed out to the West Coast to go see Cody and do some gigs with them. And when we got out there, the first night we got there is when I met, he said, you got to meet these guys asleep at the wheel. So they all came over, and we jammed all night, became big friends. started doing gigs together. There was a band called Clover.
Oh, yeah.
Which was Huey Lewis's band. And we all we just did stuff together, and everybody shared the money. I mean, you know, we'd make $10, $15, whatever, you know. Had a lot of fun.
Playing places like the Long Branch.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fond memories of that myself. I'm curious about your association with a couple of people. Johnny Shines is somebody I would never have associated with you, but you obviously spent a lot of time with him. He's, I see him as sort of a Delta musician, but I guess he did have another side to himself there in Chicago.
Yeah, he did, but there were a couple of remarkable things that I saw Johnny do in the way of kind of R&B ballad type material.
Huh.
But Johnny never got far away from just that raw, heavy kind of thing. It was really cool, yeah.
And you worked with Robert Jr. Lockwood?
Quite a bit. Yeah, he was one of my mentors.
Mm-hmm. That's great to learn from these people. What were you playing when you were you playing guitar with these guys?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was playing piano, but not much. I started playing more piano in Ann Arbor when I was around Boogie Woogie Red and Roosevelt Sykes. He was a regular. Now, as far as what I learned from those guys, the most important stuff I learned from those guys didn't have anything to do with licks. It had to do with life. And that's why I really gravitated towards Johnny and Walter and Robert and Roosevelt Sykes. These guys were class acts. Yeah, they lived through some hard stuff, but they were very, in a lot of ways, and I'm not talking politically, but they were very conservative, traditional cats, and they took me in, and Robert was a tough nut, man. Now we were traveling on a tour through the South, and I was kind of cocky. I was young and cocky, and I said, Robert, I said, show me that lick. He said, which one? I said, well, you know, on that blah, 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 what that record name. He said, oh, you couldn't learn it if I showed you. I said, yeah, I can. He said, really? He said, you prepared to pay the price if you can't learn it? So I said, okay, well, just show it to me one time. And so he played this thing, and it's one of those things that sounds easy. He said, okay, now here. Well, I took it, and I went. I said, I can do that. But I sure enough, messed it up. He said, okay, put your hands on the table, motherfucker. So I did, and there was a ruler or a stick or something there. And he took that out and just whap right across my knuckles, you know. He said, now, motherfucker, don't ever say shit unless you can back it up.
Whoa.